In this video, I'm going to give you 10 reasons why I love heating our cabin in the woods using our anthracite coal-burning stove. So this is the anthracite coal-burning stove that my wife and I use to heat our cabin in the woods here in northern Ontario, Canada all winter. It's called the Chubby stove. And the first reason I love it is that it gives lots of heat. You can see here there's some really aggressive burning going on. Anthracite coal doesn't usually shoot up flames like that when it's burning. That's only happening because I was servicing the stove when I took this shot, but you can see the stove thermometer here is showing well over 500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a pretty typical temperature for this stove. It's a lot of heat, more than enough to keep my daughter and my wife and myself warm all winter in our cabin. Even in the harshest Canadian winters, which sometimes get down to minus 30 degrees Celsius or colder, there's never a shortage of heat here in the cabin, as there sometimes has been in past years when we've heated with wood. The second reason I love this stove is that it's very easy to service. In fact, servicing the Chubby anthracite burning stove specifically only takes about 5 minutes every 12 hours, so once in the morning and once at night. The first step of that is to dump the previous 12 hours worth of coal ash from the ash pan that's stored underneath the firebox of the stove. I keep my ash in this galvanized steel garbage can here. From there, you take the empty ash pan and put it back underneath the firebox to receive another 12 hours worth of coal ash as the stove continues to burn. The next step of servicing this particular stove, the Chubby stove, involves something called flossing. You lie down on the floor with a fire poker and you slide that poker back and forth between the slats of the round rotating grate that forms the bottom of the burn pot of this particular stove, above which all the burning coals are housed. Once the flossing's done, and I find it only takes me 2 or 3 minutes on average, you close the bottom door and you do what's called shaking down. That involves hooking that same fire poker into the handle on the side of this particular stove and sliding that handle back and forth 27 times. That handle controls the rotation of the grate that forms the bottom of the fire pot. So as you can see here, as I slide the handle back and forth, the grate rotates and all the coal rotates, and it shakes loose any remaining ash. The only remaining step is to fill the burn pot with fresh coal, level with the top. You want to put it in gently because putting in fresh coal forcefully can put out anthracite fires. Coal burning is kind of sensitive that way, but I've never had a problem. I put the coal in gently, and once that burn pot is full, it'll easily give you another 12 hours of uninterrupted burning without having to do anything to it at all. I used to burn wood in a regular airtight wood stove to heat this same house, or cabin rather, for years. And I have nothing against wood. I like burning wood. I like cutting and splitting wood. But one thing I did find is that you have to do a lot of things pretty often to a wood stove to keep it burning well. That's just certainly not the case with an anthracite coal burning stove, at least not with this one. The third thing I love about this stove is that it heats my whole house evenly. Oftentimes when you have a radiant heat source, a single heat source somewhere in your house, you have hot areas and cold areas in the house, but even upstairs here, even in this snowy, blowy weather that we often get during the winter, it's warm and toasty. The evenness of the anthracite coal fire from the Chubby stove really surprised me in a good way when I first installed the stove and started burning it. You wouldn't think that the heat would be that even, considering how blazing hot the stove gets. As you can see here, these coals are almost white hot. They are white hot right in the middle here. And again, this was shot during servicing, so it's kind of extra hot to show you. But our thermostat regularly reads 22 degrees Celsius, which is our ideal temperature. And the thermostats in other parts of the house read that same temperature too. So we never have an uneven heat problem. And one reason for that is this thing here, a barometric damper. When the stove gets burning too hot, that flap will flap open and it'll slow down the combustion reaction. Another thing that makes this particular stove heat exceptionally evenly is a blower fan at the back that I have on a variable speed switch, as you can see. It blows warm air, heated by the combustion chamber, through these vents at the front of the stove and circulates that air all around our cabin. I find that does a whole lot to keep the heat even and consistent throughout the house. Another thing I love about this stove is that all things considered, it's pretty inexpensive to burn. Of course, the price of different heating options varies greatly depending on where you are and your situation, but for me, burning coal is cheaper than ready to burn firewood. It's a lot cheaper than electricity and propane heat as well. The only thing that would be comparable would be heating with natural gas, but that's not available in the remote area where I live. One of these 40-pound bags, made by a company called Blashack out of Pennsylvania, I have these shipped in. One of these bags costs me about $10 Canadian, so about $7.50 American, at least based on the exchange rate at the time I'm making this video. And to heat our 1,000 square foot cabin, one of these bags will last me just under 2 days, which I find is a pretty good deal. It ends up working out to about 1.8 imperial tons of coal burned per winter and costs me just under $1,000. The fifth thing I like about using my anthracite coal burning stove is the fact that there's no prep work involved in getting coal ready to burn, unlike firewood. Like I said, I don't have anything against firewood. I used it for years in this very same cabin. But unless you get your firewood ready to burn, there's a lot of work involved in cutting and splitting it yourself. And if you don't get it ready to burn, there's usually a lot of cost involved. With coal, you buy it once, you pay for it, and for me, it's a pretty reasonable price, and it keeps you warm and comfortable. There's no stacking, there's no splitting, there's no getting out the chainsaw and maintaining it with gas and oil. It's very simple. Then there's the fact that if you play your cards right, you don't have to let an anthracite coal fire go out all winter. I regularly keep fires going in my Chubby stove from December to April, and I've never had a problem doing that. Part of the reason that's possible is that anthracite coal burns so cleanly, so you don't have to let it go out regularly to clean soot out of the stovepipe and things like that, which was certainly not the case for me back when I was burning wood. That said, if you do want to burn wood rather than coal sometimes, this particular stove, the Chubby anthracite stove, allows you to do that. And there are times that you do want to burn wood rather than coal. Behind me here is the firewood pile that we use to heat our cabin in the woods here during the shoulder seasons, during fall and spring. Now, the pieces of wood in this pile are about 16 inches long. That's too long to fit in the burn pot of the Chubby stove, so I cut them shorter during the shoulder seasons, either with a chainsaw or a portable battery-powered miter saw that I have. Having the option to burn wood during the shoulder seasons is great because coal just gives so much heat. We'd be overheated and opening windows and wasting heat if we started burning coal right away and burnt it right into the spring. So it's really nice to have the option to burn a fuel that gives somewhat less heat, this firewood here, in the same stove whenever we want to. Another point worth mentioning is just how cleanly anthracite coal burns, especially in a stove like this. As I mentioned, I'm able to keep this stove burning constantly all winter long, where I live here in northern Ontario, Canada, and there's never any soot buildup. There's no black, shiny residue on the inside of my stovepipes. The only thing this fire really generates is some light gray fly ash that coats the inside of the stovepipe over time and does need to be cleaned out once a season, but no creosote, nothing dangerous, no chances of chimney fires at all. To illustrate the point of just how cleanly this stove burns anthracite coal, I'm going to give you a look inside the turn damper here and give you a view inside the stovepipe. I should mention that at the time of this video, I've been burning this stove constantly for almost 8 weeks, and you can see that the only thing in there is a little bit of gray fly ash. There's no soot, there's no creosote buildup, there's nothing gnarly at all. The ninth thing I love about heating with anthracite coal is the fact that it's not electricity dependent. We have a fair bit of bad weather during the winter in this area, and a fair number of power outages. They're quite a regular occurrence. But it's reassuring to know that no matter how long the power's out for at any given time, we're going to be able to keep our cabin in the woods here warm and toasty, no matter how cold it gets outside. Even though we do have a backup generator here that we use during outages, personally, I'd feel pretty nervous if my main heat source for this cabin during our harsh Canadian winters depended on electricity in order to work. And finally, the last thing I love about our anthracite coal burning stove is the fact that it's a classic way to heat. The stove itself is beautiful. It looks like an antique, even though it was manufactured new when I bought it. And heating with coal, the way that our grandparents and great-grandparents did, There's something beautiful and classic about that too, at least for me. Well, thanks very much for watching this video on why we love heating our home with our anthracite coal-burning stove during the winter. If you liked the video, give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for lots more great cabin in the woods content.